But then last time we kind of wrapped up with you heading from your enlistment to go to Keesler, but Camp Humbug was something that you mentioned to me as being kind of a curious and interesting little story. So how about we start there and then move on to your experiences at Keesler Air Force Base?
Good enough, Tom. Yes, well, Fort Humbug is something that I discovered when I went up there to be inducted in the service. And really all that was left there was, nowadays there's a building at that location, and they simply refer to it at the location as Fort Humbug, because at one time, probably during the Civil War, as the story goes, the people defending Shreveport had taken some logs and fashioned some artificial artillery so that people with glasses coming up the Red River would be fooled by a false fort. Well, I was inducted there, and they instructed me to report to Camp Beauregard when I was directed to. So a few days after that, I went to Fort Camp Beauregard, which is in Pineville, and spent one night there and got my dog tags and my duffel bag, and they told me how to get to New Orleans and get a ride on a train and to Biloxi. So I executed that a few weeks later when I got the instruction and the date and the time to do it, which turned out to be, as you know, the 23rd of November.
Right.
1943. Really day that I remember. Real day that I remember.
So you arrived by train. There was a depot at Biloxi.
I had to. Yes. Yeah. Well, but yes, and a truck met the train. Okay. 6x6 truck, and took us to Keesler Field because it was very nearby. I've forgotten what the distance was from Biloxi, but I remember many things about Biloxi. Well, I was placed immediately upon arrival in Biloxi into a group of 200 people called a flight. They called it squads or companies in various branches of the service, but this was the Army Air Corps, and so Army terms were pretty much in vogue at the time. So the Air Corps wanted to sound different, so they called it a flight. And all of the cadets from this region of the United States were sent to that location. There were several other locations to which they went. But when I arrived there with the other 200 people, I only knew one guy who was in that flight, and he was from Natchitoches Parish, where I was from. But I didn't see him anymore. We were there for 3 months of training, 12 weeks. So they put us in a tent area where the tents were already, the standard square Army tents were already standing. Somebody else had erected them there. So they assigned our flight to those tents. It happened to be near the end of the year, you see. Getting winter time, getting cold, and it was raining. It rained, and rained. But we kept on with our marching and other things. The thing that impressed me the most about that basic training was I didn't need most of it because I'd been through infantry training at LSU ROTC. But most of it is simply marching. Well, one big part of it was KP. So we were assigned about 20 people because Keesler Air Force Base at the time had 60 huge mess halls. And there were probably about 50 or 60,000 people at Keesler Field at the time. It was a city. So when we went on KP, we went on for 2 weeks at a time. And we got up at 2 o'clock in the morning, arrived at the mess hall at 3, and we didn't get back to go to bed at night after we'd finished washing the pots and pans until late. So that 2 weeks kept us busy. It's okay, it wasn't bad. When that was over with, we went back to our marching and our basic training, which was minimal. Mostly was learning how to march and follow instructions. And the thing that impressed me there, which was not rewarding to me, there was an officer in charge of the flights that were there for 12 weeks training. He was a second lieutenant named Lieutenant Shipp, S-H-I-P-P. The tents that we were in and the wind that was blowing and the rain that was falling and the temperature that we had at a certain point in time became so bad that I was sleeping under 4 blankets, which are Army blankets, are heavy. And the tent leaked so bad that I awoke with the top blanket soaking wet, but was frozen, stiff with ice. I'm not sure it was the same day, but very close to that same day, I was feeling very sick. I don't know if I had fever or not, but I went on sick call. That's something that the sergeant asked anybody necessarily had to go to sick call. So I went on sick call, and they had what they call a day room that trainees could get to when they were in their off time. There were books to be read and ping pong tables and so forth. So I went, that's where we were going to be picked up to go to sick call by an ambulance. So I went up there, was standing outside by a trash barrel. It was a steel drum. The top had been cut out of it, and trash was burned in it sometimes, or placed in it. At any rate, I was standing by that barrel, and suddenly I blacked out. I remember grabbing hold of the barrel and just squatting down to the ground. I could hear, but I couldn't see. Some people grabbed me, asked me what was wrong. I couldn't talk. They picked me up, carried me in that day room, and put me on a ping pong table. Well, when they put me on a ping pong table and the circulation kind of got back to my head, I guess, I began to come to. I could understand what they were saying, but I couldn't respond to them. But the ambulance arrived momentarily, and they had me get in the ambulance. I went to the hospital with pneumonia, and I spent 2 weeks in the hospital.
About what month was this? I mean, how long had you been there?
I'd been there about 3 or 4 weeks.
Oh, okay.
And it occurred so during that 12 weeks, I had 2 weeks of KP, 2 weeks of pneumonia, 2 weeks of KP, 2 weeks in the hospital with the flu.
Ooh.
So I wound up getting about 4 weeks of training altogether. The rest of the time was KP, flu, and pneumonia. At the end of our, by the way, another flight of 200 people arrived about 2 weeks later. They were coming in there at the rate of about 200 people for 2 weeks.
2 weeks after y'all had arrived?
2 weeks at a time, yes.
Oh, that's it.
And however, an interesting thing that we learned about and observed, although we couldn't see much about it, was conversation about it. Bull in the tent area. The next group of cadets, because what they were calling us was cadets, because we had enlisted to become pilots, trainees, navigator trainees, bombardier trainees. They took the next 200 behind us, sent them straight to the infantry.
Whoa.
We were the last flight of 200 people at Keesler Field to remain in the Army Air Corps. And that had been my goal when I told my parents I wanted to volunteer for enlistment so that I could select my branch, the Air Corps, instead of the infantry. Because they were short in Europe of infantry.
Think about where those infantry boys would have ended up going.
Oh, they were going to training camps where they were going to spend their 90 days, 12 weeks, because the first 90 days were basic training, the second 90 days completing the 12 weeks for all of us, whether we stayed in cadets or went to the infantry. The second 12 weeks was what's called advanced individual training.
Right.
Well, the first thing we did, because we were still in the Army Air Corps, you see, so we finished our 90 days of basic, and then we were divided up and shipped out to those areas in groups of different sizes, to those areas that needed manpower with certain advanced individual training, and ours was to become a plotter and teller in an air defense control center. And so when we finished our 12 weeks, they sent about 20 of us in Alpha. By the way, they sent people out to different areas in alphabetical order. Bloom, 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 bloom. When it got down to the S's, they sent 20 of us to Bradley Field, Connecticut.
Okay.
Put us on a train, troop train, went right through Washington, D.C., stayed on that troop train for about 2 days, and wound up at Bradley Field, Connecticut.